Guru Nation just finished up a long day, Friday, marathon Friday of phone calls, teleconferences. What you're about to listen to, and please, I won't be upset if you're watching on YouTube and you decide to listen on the podcast, which is Random Musings from the Clinical Trials Guru. This particular long piece of content is much more podcast appropriate, but it's just me, and I took snippets of me from a teleconference today with a PI. The first time I'm ever talking to this PI for a potential new site that we're considering opening with somebody from Guru Nation, actually, somebody that reached out and we've been networking with for the past 2 years. So this is our first conversation with a potential PI. I obviously can't put their questions in there because it's confidential, but you can hear most of my answers and you can sort of determine what the questions were, and you'll just get general themes of what PI objections are and then how you respond to them if you're a site owner. So enjoy, watch it, listen, go listen in the car, Random Musings from the Clinical Trials Guru, or just continue watching here. Take care.
Questions you might have about what it means to be a principal investigator for your own studies and how we go about that process. So anything you'd like to ask about clinical research in general? You know, there's three types of revenue for doctors. There's linear, where you're literally going out and doing all the work. There's leveraged, where you have NPs and PAs go out and doing it for you. And then you've got residual, and clinical research attempts to be that residual income because of people like who are coordinators that really do the vast majority of the work, which means all you have to do is maintain oversight of the patient safety. Myself and Chris, we've been on the business side. We partner with a lot of clinics across the country since 2005. I've owned my own clinics. We currently own clinics across the country, none in as a matter of fact. We're based out of California, so most of our clinics are here. We have one in Baltimore. We have another one in Chicago. This will be actually our first one in the South altogether. We have, in addition to sites, we have a lot of clients across the country that hire us to do their business development for them. So get them studies, do their budgets, help them with their SOPs, help them with their quality assurance. In this case, is actually going to do all the operations of running a site. She's going to be the site director, the coordinator. She's going to manage everything for you so that everything's done, and all you have to do is maintain PI oversight and just continue to do what you're doing, because your private practice feeds the research practice with potential patients. Chris and I are in the background. We are working on getting the studies, doing the budgets, and helping out with in an advisory capacity. So that's how Chris and I operate. We also own a CRO, so we have a lot of contacts with sponsors in the industry that are looking for sites. So we'll be able to get a fast track on a lot of these studies for you. So that's really in a nutshell how we're going to operate this, because without a good study coordinator, I mean, we can get all the studies in the world, we can have all the patients we want, but the study will fall apart. So we only partner in terms of equity with people like, because she's been doing this for 12 years, she understands what it takes to run a site. So that's why I think it's a good opportunity for us, and I think it is for you as well. Just learning about your practice here in the last 10 minutes. So when we say own clinic, we're referring to the research business within or a standalone adjacent to a medical practice of one of our PIs. But for example, the clinic that I spend most of my time at in Costa Mesa, California is called Global Clinical Trials. The one where Chris spends most of his time is called Breakthrough Clinical Trials. Yours, you know, if we decide to open it, we call it whatever you guys want. We own a percentage of the research business. So each research clinic has its own LLC. We are not what is called a site management organization. We the way we operate is we usually take a minority ownership in many of these sites. The only exception is the sites that we founded solely, Chris and I. But like in the case of you, in the case of our Baltimore clinic, Chicago, we take a minority equity position because we're providing an advisory role and we're doing all the biz dev behind the scenes to keep that study pipeline full. So we have a parent company that we own. It's just Chris and I. But then when we partner, we take our equity position through that LLC. It takes a good amount of time, years, to develop that reputation. And when you're a startup, you don't have that time. You need studies immediately. You need to negotiate the maximum budgets that you can. And that's where, honestly, that's where the bulk of our value comes in that first 2 years. And that's also the first years where you're not really making the money that you can. If you have an 8-cylinder car, you're probably only running on 2 cylinders during that time. So by the time we get all 8 cylinders firing, it's true, our role becomes less valuable, and we do have buyout options in the operating agreements where you can buy our shares out, although, you know, oftentimes the business is doing so good, we just prefer to keep it. So that's when our value comes in other places, like creating the source, helping with, there's always different operational issues, and it's also a time issue. She's going to be doing 8 studies as a coordinator. She's not going to have time to do biz dev. She's not going to have time to do the contracts and budgets. We know from our own sites, I mean, that's a full-time job in and of itself. Each one of those, business development's a full-time job, doing the contracts and budgets and the regulatory full-time job. So for our percent or whatever we're going to take, you're getting bang for your buck. But yes, to ease your concerns, because, you know, I might have those same concerns too. Why would I want these guys here for the next 20 years if their value was really in the first 4 years? And that's a fair argument. And we do have a buyout option. If the business is profitable, it's a multiple of whatever the profit is based on 3 independent CPAs that value the business. So, and then we take the average of that. But that's if the site is successful. I mean, it's, you know, that's we got to get there first. If the business is doing well, we wouldn't do that. And if it's not doing well, I mean, we would all probably want to walk away. Nobody wants to waste time, even if you're not putting money in. Nobody wants to waste time on something that's not paying them a return. But yeah, what Chris and I are trying to do is we're building our infrastructure. We want equity and clients in as many places as possible to build our CRO, because as we build our CRO, one of our competitive advantages is telling the sponsor, hey, if you give me this study, I have 50 sites that can get up and running in the next 3 months. And what that further builds for us is credibility. And then what that really gives us, which is what I really want and what we're starting to do, getting us some equity in some of these very small biotechs before they get acquired, before they do licensing deals, before they go public. We're getting in at the early stages with our CRO. So that's ultimately what I'm trying to do. That's the pie in the sky. And all these sites and everything else we do is the infrastructure. And it's also the insurance. Like, if that doesn't pan out, hey, at least we have like 50 sites across the country that are doing, you know, moderately well on average. So that's our big picture. Contract research organization. So they are the ones who are in between the sponsors and the sites. They send the CRAs out, which are monitors, to audit the study. They don't have any patient interaction. All they do is look at the data and they package the data so that the sponsor can then submit that to the FDA. So all the CRO really just do the paperwork and the quality assurance for the studies. They have zero patient interaction. We're very cautious about who we partner with as far as equity. If it's a consulting client, we'll take anyone because they're just paying us a monthly retainer, and we don't even have a contract with them. It's just month-to-month contract, so they can quit anytime. But while they're paying us, it's like Netflix. While you're paying Netflix, you have access to all all their content, everything. While you're paying us, you have access to all of our biz dev. We're getting studies constantly. It's like a machine. When we partner on the equity side, we're much more careful. We actually turn down many more than we agreed to partner with. And that's because if they're not people like, it's really not worth my time for 15% because the probability of success goes down tremendously if the person who's actually doing the work doesn't know what they're doing. So if I have to now train them, unless it's in Southern California and I can physically go there and do it, which I will charge more equity, it's not worth it for me or Chris to do that. So we have to partner with people, and they don't come around that often. Maybe we do 2 or 3 of these type of deals a year, maximum. So this like we've already filtered. We haven't done background checks on anyone yet, but that'd be the next step. But yeah, I mean, you know, provided that she's not a criminal, this is a good partnership for us. Okay, on the other end, you have PIs who do all the work. Like it'd be like you doing what we do. I mean, having like 100% oversight. The problem there is you've got to take some resources of yours away from your private practice, your house calls, I'm assuming hospital rounds or assisted living facility rounds. So that's the other end of the spectrum, complete PI oversight. And then you have many different ranges in between. So you have some PIs that maintain patient safety oversight, which I think is what we're going to aim for here. You know who your patients are, you're looking at their lab results, you're doing the physical exams, you're seeing how the study is impacting their health, right? Then you have others who outsource even that component to people like nurse practitioners or other doctors that they call sub-investigators that maintain that safety oversight. And what the PI does is co-sign those reviews with his own signature. And then you have even lower spectrum where the PI literally does nothing other than meet with the monitors. All of those things are from semi-okay to ideal. The worst that can happen is the FDA suspends you from doing research, but it has nothing to do with your license at all. What you do with Medicare is through your private practice has nothing to do with the research. So really what you're concerned about from a research perspective is maintaining that patient safety oversight and making sure you have a really good coordinator who knows what they're doing to handle most of the work for you. So all you need to do is maintain that patient safety oversight. And if you do that, you're better than 80% of the PIs out there. And that's no exaggeration. So if you maintain any semblance of oversight, and again, just like I said, we'd never equity partner with someone who doesn't have experience. Like we also will never equity partner with a physician who does not have a private practice, because that wouldn't make sense for us. Like your value is going to be in your patient safety oversight and in your patient database for us. Over the years, we're going to build your brand maybe as a preferred site for research, which is going to be good for you, and then it's going to encourage you to maintain that patient safety oversight, which is really the most important thing for a principal investigator. There's one more variable here that clinics can differ on. There's standalone research clinics, and both can be successful. I actually own both types. There's standalone research clinics where it's not built inside the doctor's private practice, but it's in a completely separate building. And the PI and the support staff come to them as needed. There's also this is the PI's office. In those 2 rooms in the back, that's where we do research. And the PI is always here because this is his office. So both of those can work. Obviously, the one inside the office has its advantages when it comes to your travel time, convenience, and also just the fact that the patients are there and they don't need to go anywhere else. The disadvantages could be sometimes you run out of space. So I actually don't know which of these models we're considering with you. And maybe you don't either, I don't know. As far as capital investment, the only expenses when starting a site would be paying for the rent that we're using, paying a person like, and some minimal equipment. So we have two of those three already. That's zero expenses so far. I'm assuming you have most of the equipment. I can actually email you a list. It's not expensive stuff. So there's really not much capital to put into this. Really, in research, the vast majority of the expenses go into the personnel. And in our cases, I mean, we're working with sweat equity. You are as well. So there's really no money being put into it up front. It's all sweat equity, which is really good because it reduces the risk. Now, there are going to be expenses like paying the patient, small things like building a website, which we will do, email server. I mean, these are small expenses. The bigger issue really is timing when we can get this first study, because it's the hardest thing in the world to go from 0 to 1. I mean, that's the process of creation. Like, it takes something similar to a miracle to make that happen. Going from 1 to 10 and then from 10 to 100 is not that hard. That's not creation. That's evolution. We got to get from 0 to 1. From 0 to 1, I think it takes 3 months from our experiences, about 3 months to get you that first study. Okay, now, from when that first study is activated at our site, may take another 3 months. So now we're looking at 6 months of no revenue. Now at month 6, we can start screening patients. It takes typically 3 months to recoup or to get the revenue from a patient visit in research. So now we're looking at 9 months projections of where we can actually start getting revenues for the clinic. Now, there are some revenues. There's some things called invoiceable fees that we can bill for early on before we even screen patients. These are startup costs. Usually we can get anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 per study in startup costs, but that's really just to pay the expenses that we have at that time, if there's any. If not, we just save it. At month 9, that's when things get interesting and revenue starts coming in. So now it's just a matter of repeating that process, getting more patients for that study, but also bringing in other studies at the same time. And some, I think, can handle about 8 studies on her own before we need to bring in somebody else as an employee to help her out. And we could always bring a medical assistant. We can get free medical assistants from the MA schools that are literally on every street corner in the United States. We can get into that scam later, but they're definitely there to extern. And so we don't even need to pay them until we find the right one that's going to fit in well. So these MAs, they draw blood, they do vitals, all that stuff. But so every now and then you get one that shows potential to be a coordinator. And we are eventually going to keep activities to the highest income generating activities she can have while having all these support staff help her out. So she will eventually evolve into a site director. If we do that well, I think by year 2, we can have 7 figures gross revenue in a good market. Now, clinical research is cyclical. There's been bad times too. We're in a good market right now. I think 7-figure gross revenue by year 2 is not unrealistic if we can get 6 studies, and from those 6, maybe 2 that we can enroll a really good amount of patients for. And based on how we manage expenses and based on how we divvy up our equity ownerships, every quarter we're going to have fairly nice dividends because this is a high profit margin industry. If you're not spending on unnecessary staff, you're going to have 70, 80% profit margins. early on, we're going to have almost 100% profit margins. There's going to be no expenses. But as we grow, that's going to be less. Ultimately, it should be somewhere around 70. Even the biggest clinics I know, their profit margins are no less than 50%. Let's say we have an established site for 2 years in a good market. And now, so we've gotten, let's say 8 studies in that time period. And now we're entering a bad market. Those studies, these are usually long-term studies. They're still going to be going on in the bad market because we already got them in the good market. The problem is the pipeline for the next year. So you might go from having 6 studies a year to having 1 or 2 studies in a year. So that's when you've got to start considering letting staff go, reducing hours. You can try to diversify by bringing in other specialists, because not every therapeutic indication follows the same pattern. Sometimes central nervous system is very hot, other times it's in a drought. So the more diverse you can be, the more you can reduce that uncertainty. And having a general medicine family practice physician is probably ideal early on because it opens us up to the widest variety of trials. But in my projections for a startup clinic, if you go from having 8 studies a year in a good market to 2 studies a year in a bad market, that's about typical for a research clinic of our. Yeah, we wouldn't start a clinic in a bad market. That was between 2012. No, between 2011 and 2014 were really bad markets. We only started 1 site during that time. And it took us until 2016 to get that site profitable. So we wouldn't even be having this conversation if we were in that. We're in a really good market right now. If I had to guess, I would say that's a SMO, a site management organization. And what they do is kind of similar to us, but you know how I explained that all of our sites are different LLCs? Well, for them, and I don't know them, I'm just going on what I think. They do all the marketing. It's more like a franchise model as opposed to that'd be like you opening up a Subway instead of your own sandwich shop, I think is the best analogy.
So hey everybody, thank you very much for listening to another episode of Random Musings from the Clinical Trials Guru. Again, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to this podcast. Make sure you leave a review if you could be so kind, please. And also go to theclinicaltrialsguru.com if you're interested in learning more about who I am, who some of my guests are. You can have access to some of my YouTube videos. I do a lot of videos about clinical research. So go to theclinicaltrialsguru.com, and you can also call or text me anytime, 949-415-6256. Also follow me on any social media platform. It's Dan Svera. And you can also email me if you'd like, dan@theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Thank you very much.